Hey everyone, thanks for joining the American Solar Energy Society's May webinar. I'm going to give everyone just another minute or two to go ahead and hop online for our noon start time, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining and being on time, but we'll just give everyone another minute or two to join in. Alrighty, looks like we've got all of our attendees kind of coming in right now. So I'll go ahead and get started with our intro. Want to welcome everyone to the American Solar Energy Society's May webinar. Before I hand it over to our presenter today, Scott Sklar, I would like to update you all on some of ASES's programs. Our 49th annual National Solar Conference will now be 100% virtual on a fully interactive online platform where you can watch live and recorded sessions in our animated auditorium, network with other attendees in our networking lounge, and virtually meet our exhibitors in a virtual exhibit hall. Our early bird discount does end this Friday, May 29th. So be sure to register before then for a great deal. It's 25 bucks off. So it'll go up from $274 to $299. ASES members also receive additional discounts. So be sure to join ASES at ases.org/join to learn more about the discounts available. Also head to ases.org/conference to learn more about the conference and register. As a thank you for joining us on today's webinar, I'd like to offer you all a little discount of 10% off with promo code THANKYOU2020 listed up here. So be sure to throw that in for an extra little discount at registration. And I would like to also update everyone on the National Solar Tour. So ASES's National Solar Tour, in partnership with Solar United Neighbors, is online, and the sign-up form is ready for you to sign up to host either a local tour or open house. We are also looking into plans about making this a virtual event if we cannot be in person for the tour this year. So be sure to sign up and learn more at nationalsolartour.org. I'd also like to remind everyone that we will have a webinar next month on June 8th at noon Mountain Time on electrifying everything with Nate Adams. ASES is now offering all the webinars free during this unprecedented time, so please consider donating $20 in support of our webinar series at ases.org/donate. Now I'd like to introduce our May webinar speaker, Scott Sklar, who will be presenting on maximizing our resources and technology in order to reach a 100% renewable energy society. Note, this is also a sneak peek at the content we will be sharing at Solar 2020, the virtual conference on June 24th and 25th. So be sure to head to ases.org/conference to learn more and register. I will now hand things over to our 2020 conference chair, Scott Sklar.
Great. Okay, I'm looking for the Windows share screen here. Show my screen. This is so amazing. There we go. Hi, everybody. So, slideshow. There we go. Okay. So I obviously know many of you through the years. For 15 years, I ran the Solar Industries Association, and the last 20 years, I have a company that blends all the renewable technologies, high value energy efficiency, and all the energy storage applications for commercial, industrial, infrastructure, and institutional. 2/3 of my projects are overseas, 1/3 in the United States. And I have 2 buildings that are self-powered in Arlington, Virginia, my office building that's 2 stories and my home. I also am an adjunct professor at the George Washington University. I teach 3 interdisciplinary courses on sustainable energy, including this summer, a graduate course, which is the first in the country for the 3rd year now on renewable energy and critical infrastructure. And I also am the director of the energy director of the Environment and Energy Management Institute, EEMI, at GW, George Washington University, here in Washington, D.C. So I always love to start my briefings on looking at trends. And I love this McKinsey slide, a slide that is excellently colorful, because it really sort of highlights the disruptive technologies. And as you can see in the top left, renewable energy is right there. Of course, we're in a fracking period too, but that's going to end according to EIA. But advanced materials may be one of the real drivers. We were in a material science renaissance, and you can see on the left. And the reason we can have offshore wind in salt water, which is also acidic, is 700 times more dense than air, and have animals that can pit the materials, and the materials last in the ocean, is because of these advanced materials that really didn't exist even 15 years ago. And the same thing for marine and tidal technology. So, and of course, advanced photovoltaics and advanced storage. And if you plop down to on the left there, to the energy storage side, aside from batteries, we have flywheels, compressed air and liquids, and weight, and we have, of course, pumped hydro, and we have even hydrogen. And so this whole issue of advanced materials and energy storage are disruptors along with distributed renewable energy. And if you look to the right of this chart, is really all tied to the internet and advanced computing. And of course, not only do I power many of these things like data centers and cell towers and things, but then of course I use this network to keep track of how all these distributed energy, efficiency, renewables, and storage are behaving, and can make sure they're repaired appropriately no matter where they are in the world. So we are part of a trend, which I'll get into in a minute, because this one is where the electric grid is going. And so when I had hair on my head and my beard was black, we only had centralized power plants. And by the way, that the electric utility 100% owned. And today, less than half are utility owned. The rest are built by other people, both gas primarily, and of course all the renewables, and they're financed under power purchase agreements or leases, or if they're building shared savings ESPC contracts, and they're mixtures. So we will have central station power plants, but we will also have power along transmission lines, whether it's large solar farms or wind or geothermal. We will have power at substations, both transmission substations and distribution substations, and of course power in buildings. And mixed within that are all these storage options. And I need to remind you what the end game is. We are actually following the third wave of grids. The first was the communications grid, and with satellites, fiber optics, and cell towers. And when a cell tower goes down or a satellite goes down, we don't lose communication. They automatically passively triangulate and make sure you have communication. The same is true with the internet. When the data centers go down, and we have data centers going down every month around the world, the internet doesn't go down. It passively triangulates around data centers and gets the information you need. Well, that's really what we're trying to do with the grid. We're trying to make the grid smarter. We're going to have with reclosers and extenders, so the grid itself can sectionalize. We will have microgrids where the parts of the localized distribution can passively separate from the faltering grid or the closed down grid and keep localities going, and of course buildings. And within that smart grid, we can have storage which can route electricity along different wires to the end game and have lots of flexibility. So the whole issue of where we're going is not only to make the grid more reliable and of course lower cost, but to make it more resilient and be dealing with climate change, cyber terrorism, and terrorism. So this is the chart I like to use to start this talk about going to a 100% renewable world. And this is DLR. This is part of the Greenpeace report on going 100%, which I'm going to review later on. But I love this chart because it shows how much renewable resources we have in the world. And so you look at solar, we have more than 2,800 times more energy than we use in a year. Of course, we can't access all of that economically, but with that much overage, you need a very small percent to have a giant contribution to the earth. Wind is 200 times. Biomass, and we're talking biomass here, not growing plantations. This is the waste. This is the stuff we have dying, or manures and sewage from people and agricultural residue and all those things. We have 20 times. And geothermal, 5 times. Heat from the earth, 9,000 degrees in the earth. Most electricity today is made by using coal, oil, gas, and uranium to create heat, to create steam, to generate electricity. Well, the earth is doing it on its own without any combustion. And then, of course, we have the movement of water, wave and tidal, 2 times what the earth needs. And hydropower, actually no new dams, just existing dams around, 1 time. So we have a huge amount of resources, of which the 4 on the bottom are 24-hour power. And some of solar is too, with concentrated solar. And of course, wind and photovoltaics are variable, but we can use energy storage to get full capacity. But the point here is we have no shortage of resource available on this planet. Now, I want to start this because I believe any presenter should talk about their bias. And I'm going to lay it out right now. And so I'm going to be reviewing these studies with you on clean energy, but there is a premise, and the premise is the maximization of high value energy efficiency. If we do not maximize cost effective, high value saving energy efficiency, we really can't meet 100% renewable energy. Because we'd be wasting a lot of energy and it would cost a lot. And actually, even if you didn't want to go to 100% renewable energy, you want to maximize high value energy efficiency. I tell my students that it's always less expensive to save energy than generate it from any source, and that is true. And so if you look at my 2 zero energy buildings, I maximized energy efficiency. So my 2-story building in my home uses about 40% less electricity than any home of comparable size in Northern Virginia. And my office building uses more than 55% less energy than a comparable building its size in Northern Virginia. So therefore, I need a lot less renewables and energy storage to sustain the building. And that's what we do need, particularly in an industrialized society, is the maximizing high value energy efficiency. The other issue is we need the entire portfolio of renewable energy. I see these studies on solar only, wind only, solar and wind only, nonsense. And in fact, we're starting to see articles that solar's, going in forest land or prime farmland. We don't want to do that. We don't need to do that if we're maximizing the use of geothermal, if we're maximizing the use of wind, if we're maximizing the use of water energy, marine, tidal, and wave, if we're maximizing the use of wind energy, both large and small. So the point being here is that we need to look at all the options. And then, of course, energy storage and advanced sensors, controls, and software. There is no reason to take energy the moment it's produced and necessarily use it at that time. In fact, wind mostly blows in the late afternoons and into the evening, and most of our energy is used in daytime. So let us store that energy or send it elsewhere, whether it's earlier, to maximize the value of that energy. And advanced sensors, controls, and software can help you manage energy storage as well as the renewables, as well as end use. And so I come to you with those values. And so the maxims I put out on this slide is that we need to use the entire, no 1 or 2 renewable energy technologies can meet 100%. We as a world cannot meet complete renewables in the time necessary to mitigate climate change unless we maximize energy efficiency in every single sector: buildings, industry, transportation, infrastructure, and energy production and generation. And lastly, we cannot meet renewable energy and greenhouse gas goals without sustainable use of biomass. And biomass, again, is the waste, the organic waste we produce from 7.5 billion people: sewage, manures, food processing waste, contaminated feedstuffs, which all turn to methane, at least 25 times more potent than carbon. We need to intercept that, and we need to make energy, fertilizers, and other materials that we need in our society. So that's what I come to you with in this presentation, is not a look at a narrow view on sustainable energy, but a maximum view. So I want to start on energy efficiency. This is out of September, and this is a report from the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, ACEEE. They are the energy think tank based in Washington, and they put out the best studies. I hope you look on their website if you're not familiar with them. And basically, their report that came out of September of last year says that we could cut U.S. energy use and greenhouse gas emissions by 50% in 2050, 30 years from now. And we can do that, and they include studies from the International Energy Agency and Natural Resource Defense Council, but they look at 11 cost-effective measures to get rid of carbon and waste, and it's all cost-effective. So we as a society need to embark on this first. Saving energy will not only be faster than generating energy, and also, frankly, faster in cost savings than any other options, but then it makes the move to renewables much more doable and in the time frame that's practical to reduce greenhouse gases according to the Paris agreements. So this is sort of an older chart from ACEEE, and they use Energy Information Administration data. EIA is the entity within Department of Energy that captures the data. And what they really want to show with that is that in 2016, now this is August 4 years ago, that energy efficiency was pretty much the third largest energy source in the U.S. economy. And, 4 years later, by the way, coal, which is now 20% or below, and energy efficiency is above 20%. So actually, efficiency has come to number 2. So it is a huge resource. And remember, if you didn't do it, you'd have to generate that extra 18 or 20 or 22% with something else. You have to meet that gap if you didn't do energy efficiency. The other report I wanted you to see was from Lawrence Berkeley Labs. And basically what they did is looked at real programs across the United States, and they basically said that investing in energy efficiency is equal to about 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, most people in this country pay somewhere between 8 and 15 cents a kilowatt hour. So by doing energy efficiency, it's a tiny cost. It's way below. And so what I'm here to tell you is you're costing you or saving you, it costs 2.5 to 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour to save a kilowatt, whereas if you were to generate it, to buy it from a utility company, it would cost you 8 cents to, let's say, 15 cents. So it's crazy if we don't do it as a society. We're wasting money. Why would we want to waste that money? So we've been in a transformation, and actually when I got in this field in the 1970s and would talk this way, I would be laughed at and ridiculed. I started my career in the U.S. Senate in the 1970s, and ultimately the oil embargo came, and I became an energy staffer and a huge proponent of renewable energy. And through my 10-year Senate career, I was laughed at most of the time. And if I ever told them that 72% of all new global power that came on the grid in 2019 was renewable, they would have thrown me out of the Senate. But I did talk that way. And that's exactly what's happened. And so this started in 2016, was the critical year where more than 50% came on the grids on the globe from renewable energy. And now in 2019, which is the closest we have data, is 72%. So that's great news. It's going to be tampered down this year because of COVID, but it's going to go right back. It's crazy. Who would want to rely on globalized resources, most of which you're importing from other countries, and whatever you're using yourself, you're polluting your air and your water, and you're contributing to greenhouse gases if you have a cheaper or a less expensive alternative. One of the studies I love and use is out of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and they did study some years back looking at self-sufficient states, and basically this is their map out of the study, which shows that with renewable resources they have within the state and technology we have today, it's no new stuff, this is what they could produce in their state. And as you look at it, most states in the United States, 32, have way overages of what they need. And actually, this study did not look at offshore wind or tidal and wave. And if you look at those technologies, states like New York, New Jersey, Georgia could be 100% self-sufficient, adding those resources. A good part of New England as well. So we have enough to power the United States here without a problem. And we have a transmission grid that does spread between the states. Now, they're not optimized for renewables. I want you to remember the grid was started because of government hydro projects and these giant hydro dams. And then, of course, the grid moved to coal mines because that's where we moved to from hydro, and then we added coal. And of course, now, the grids are not where the best wind is necessarily, or the best solar is, or the best geothermal is. So we're going to have to, and we are beginning to modify our grids so it slinks where our resources are. But that is one of the limiting factors of how to maximize these great resources we have in this country. This is a great chart, and this comes from OWEA, the American Wind Energy Association, the percent of wind share of electricity generation by state. And, and some of these are just astounding. Iowa, a third, Kansas, a third, Oklahoma, a third, a quarter in North Dakota and South Dakota. I mean, these are huge amounts of electricity. I just have to say that wrong, huge. And so here we are. And this is, again, the beginning of this transformation we're seeing of renewable resources coming practically in the grid with private capital. And by the way, if you look at this last line, $1 billion a year in revenue for states and communities that host wind farms. The same is true in photovoltaics. I decided to pick this April 2020 article for you. But we have 583.5 gigawatts, or over 500 nuclear power plants worth of electricity, according to the International Renewable Energy Agency, and shows you where it is. And so there it is. And of course, concentrated solar, which is not PV, is an additional 6.27 gigawatts coming on board. Morocco, South Africa, Australia, China, the United States, Spain, and others. This is also from last year, the Advanced Energy Economy, and they were looking at clean energy hits a record 1.6 trillion in revenue and investment, private sector investment. When I started in the 70s, it was like 280 million, of which most of it went to big hydro projects. So to see 1.6 trillion in the host of clean energy is beyond belief, frankly, in my one lifetime. So this is a global look. This is out of the International Energy Agency, and this is looking at total final energy consumption covered by mandatory energy efficiency policies. And so a third of the world's energy consumption has mandatory efficiency. But if you look country by country, over 50% of China and the United States, nearly 40% Japan, over 20% the European Union. So we're starting to see big moves in the bigger economies to start mandating energy savings as to foster this transition. And this is a chart from the International Energy Agency based in Paris. So this is the one I selected. It came out in January 2020 by Sunday Campaign, looking at the data through November 2019, and basically looking at renewables provided 52% of new generation capacity for the first 11 months of 2019. It was over 50% when you include the December figures as well. And it just sort of lays out again what's going on, and we're really seeing. So let's go to these studies. Now I give 36 studies to my classes on renewable energy, energy efficiency, and storage. And if you take them in aggregate, it will show that you can go with technology we have today 100%. I'm not going through 136 studies with you, obviously, but I'm highlighting a few. You saw the first chart in my presentation, which was from Greenpeace, and this was a study looking at going 100% eliminate fossil and nuclear by 2090, and the study Energy Revolution is a solid one. The American Solar Energy Society and National Energy Laboratory also issued a 200-page report tackling climate change, and this was going 60 or 80% reductions in carbon. And basically what they came down to, and I have a chart for you, is it would need 57% energy efficiency and 43% renewables. The one I really loved was Google.org, which is the philanthropic arm of Google. And they basically said, could we have by 2030 electricity generated not from coal or oil, but from wind, solar, and geothermal? And energy demand, because efficiency will be 2/3 of what it is now. And they said as a society, it would cost us in the transition $4.4 trillion, by the way, which is what we spent jointly in the Afghan-Iraq wars. But we would recoup 5.4 trillion in savings. So a net 1 trillion in savings, which I think is a pretty good deal. National Research Council, National Academy of Sciences took a look at this in June 2009 and said, we have enough resources with technology we have today to meet significant portion, which is over 85% of for our electric grid. I already showed you the map with the Institute of Local Self-Reliance report. So here are the other ones that you're probably not familiar with, and I want to sort of highlight them a little bit. First of all, MIT did a study, and it looked at what we could conservatively meet using the geothermal resource in the United States. And we can meet 10% of US energy needs by 2050. 10% of the United States energy needs are most countries on the planet. It's that huge amount, other than the 5 biggest ones after the United States. So, and by the way, half of that 10% is under the Appalachian mountain chain, the older mountain chain in the United States. And we'll look at a map shortly, but we have a huge resource, and 10% is an outstanding amount. Concentrated solar, there have been several studies on concentrated solar. These are solar electric technologies in the deserts using troughs, curved lenses, or heliostat, which are tracking mirrors that create extreme heat to generate electricity and have energy storage. And we're talking, the one study in the Earth Policy Institute covered 8,000 megawatts just in the Western United States, 8 nuclear power plants, but overall could meet, according to NREL, 16% of US electricity generation. What I like about this is the desert power, as we're seeing again in Spain, which is the biggest user, United States and China, Australia, South Africa, is that putting electricity generation in the deserts is probably the most benign thing you can do with solar, because you are not fundamentally disrupting the ecosystem. And I have taken many environmentalists and researchers with hip boots under these troughs and heliostats, and there are tons of snakes and scorpions and wiggly things and insects. In fact, underneath them, because they shade the sun slightly, when you're underneath them, is it's a little shadier, a little moisture, and that's where they congregate. So there's a lot of parties going on of flora and fauna in the deserts in these generation plants. So, and of course, it's drier, so your sun is clearer and longer. So there's another forgotten. So just with these two 24-hour power, you have 25% or a quarter of what we need to power the United States of America, which is huge. Navigant in 2018 took a look at the technical potential of photovoltaics on roofs, and they looked at tilt, age, shading, and basically they said we have enough roof support for about a third of our electricity. Now I'm discounting that big time, for there are a lot of different reasons on that, but I just want to say, and you'll see in my chart what I do include for it, but distributed solar, looking at photovoltaics in this case, has a huge potential. And of course, buildings are the biggest user of electricity. Here's another look at a different study using NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and they say about 320 gigawatts of rooftop, which is again, daytime 320 nuclear power plants with electricity. So that is huge. The other one I wanted to look at is water power. I have become a crazy supporter of wave, tidal, ocean currents, and ocean thermal. And there was a study done, which included Electric Power Research Institute and Hydro Association and others, that showed that we could meet conservatively 10% of our electricity. I want to remind you, 24-hour power, and most people live on the shoreline on this planet. So to be able to access 24-hour power, and by the way, I have taken tours of tidal and wave systems and ocean currents in the United States, Scotland, a leader, Spain, Australia, Japan, and China, and that's about most of them. And I have to tell you, the technologies are captivating. I have gone under the water. I really try to look dispassionately on what damage these do. And other than being careful where they are situated, if they're based on the floor of the ocean, they all are not. The wave is not on the floor. They turn slowly. They have minimal environmental damage as far as I can tell. They're near the end user. They're 24-hour power. They're zero emission, and another 10%. So going just to recap a little bit, geothermal and concentrated solar give you 25%. Water power gets you up to 35%. Waste heat is a very interesting technology. I consider it renewable because we have a lot of buildings and industrial processes and even power plants. And what do? They have cooling towers to get the heat into the atmosphere. Well, why don't we take that heat instead and either use it for heating and cooling in the buildings or use it to start generating electricity? and we could meet 8% of US electricity doing that. And it is a it's sort of a forgotten resource, as are the water power, the tide of the ocean energy technologies, and free flow hydro, by the way, I forgot to mention in here, that don't need a dam or diversion. And so now we're looking at 43% of US electricity with these technologies. So UCLA did a study, it got a lot of notoriety because it was used as part of the in the Paris Accords, sort of as the getting everybody in sync. Now, they only looked at 3 technologies: photovoltaics, wind, and hydroelectric plants. They showed you could do it. You could do it, but I don't believe it's the optimum way to go, because I already told you we have 4 other technologies here that can produce power 24 hours, and in many cases closer to the end users. So why push solar and wind and hydro to the limit when we don't need to push them to the limit? There's a great study on 100% renewable energy done out of Europe and for 2050 that's worth a look. The World Wildlife Fund put out a study, same thing, 2050, 100% renewable. Absolutely well done. So I want to make clear that there are many places that have done substantive studies on pathways to move to 100%. This is not some esoteric idea. This is something the world can do, and frankly must do, for many, many different reasons. I do want to highlight in 2011, the UN International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, issued a report on renewable energy resources and said it could meet 77% of the world's energy needs by 2020 if the governments adopt policies to take advantage of them. Now, they did not include all the technologies I just listed here. So I want to be very clear, but I thought it was well done. And you can see I can easily meet the extra 23% there. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado also did a great study on how renewable energy can meet the electricity needs of the United States, and focusing from 30 up to 90, but then really looking at 80. And it's a well done study. Again, they don't include all the technologies I did here, which is what's sad, but that's a good start and it's worth taking a look at. So now I'm going to start getting you into biomass. There are a lot of studies in it. This one is biogas at the Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions at Duke University. They're one of the best environmental programs in the country. And this one is looking at 2040 biogas in the United States, and up to 5% of our total biogas consumption. And natural gas, of course, is used for electricity generation and then mostly building heating. And 5% is a huge amount. And again, I want to remind you something. Our landfills, our cattle feedlots, our poultry litter, our food processing, if you're a vegetarian, just to make soups, your farm things, you have rotted grains, you have contaminated grains with molds like aflatoxin, which are carcinogenic, things you need to get rid of. So we have a lot of things that are biodegrading, and of course the sewage that, again, we put out of us humans, and that's all going into methane gas, unfettered, into the atmosphere. And we need to stop that. We cannot let that happen. It's because it's 25 or 29, some say more potent than carbon. It's actually accelerating climate change in the short term. So we need to intercept that. And biogas is the cleanest one and the easiest one and the most economic one. And there is absolutely no reason we as a society don't want to do that. So here's another one, Global Energy System, and this is out of LUT, University of Technology, with some others, and with they're Finland's technology, sort of Finland's MIT, and they did a great study on the global transition to 100% renewable energy. And by the way, biomass is a significant component of that. So I wanted you to be exposed to it. Waste can meet 12%. This is a Columbia University study, and this is looking at landfill gas and, of course, what goes into our landfills and other industrial fills. And there's no reason that we can't create energy and other materials from road bedding, glues and resins, chemicals. So we don't need to necessarily, combust it all up. We need to source separate it out and find out its highest value. So I wanted you to take a look at that and its greenhouse gas potential. So here's another study out of a European group looking at solar could meet 68% of global energy demand by 2050. And then below that, 130, a new Stanford report looking at energy savings, a more recent one than I showed you earlier. But I had my grad students look at all these 36 studies, and here we're looking just at the United States. And I asked them when they read all these 36 studies to pull out what are their most conservative estimates. And so this is actually more than 100%. And I'm going to do the 24-hour power first. We have biomass at 20%, geothermal at 10, and concentrated solar at 15. So now we're at 45, waste heat at 53, water energy at 63. So essentially almost 2/3 of our power is 24-hour power coming from what I call the 24-hour renewables. Then you have building renewable energy. You see at 12%. Now that's interesting, and I didn't cover it much here, but solar water heating, solar daylighting, geothermal heat pumps are my top three. There are others, and solar air conditioning. And you can meet 12% of US energy demand and with these technologies that are cost effective today. They actually don't have to be 24-hour because they work when you need it, but they are absolutely reliable. In my home, I have solar water heating, I have photovoltaics, I have a direct exchange geothermal heat pump as an example. And in my office building, I have photovoltaics, solar daylighting with a web-enabled battery bank. So the whole point being this distributed building renewable energy, non-photovoltaic here, is very significant and gets us over into 77%. And then you have wind energy and photovoltaics and solar distributed. That's 15 and 20, 35%, a third of our energy. And that's not pushing it very far as it can go. It's actually less than virtually all the studies I showed you, but it gets us over 100%. But it's not pushing any technology beyond its most sustainable, highest value, optimal amount. And that's what I like about it. So this is a Navigant study that's using Lazard, which is probably the best analytical group on energy on levelized costs. And this tracks levelized costs of energy and gives you some data, this particularly solar and wind, but they do it on all the technologies. And again, virtually all the renewable energy technologies, except some of the newer tidal and wave that's just starting to come in, but I think will be perfectly in the development line over the next few years, are all absolutely cost effective with the energy, the electricity needs we use today. So I already talked to you. I just want to re-emphasize ACEEE on cutting energy usage. And again, at 2.5 to 3.5% if you go along with Lawrence Berkeley Lab calculations. So I'm getting close to ending here, so I'm just going to zip through this. So Orlando, Florida commits to 100% renewable energy in 2017. These are the charts that the National Renewable Energy Lab said to get to 80 or 60% reductions of greenhouse gases. Notice the top purple triangle is energy efficiency. It gets you more than half there, and it's faster and cheaper, and then it lists the whole list of other renewables. It does not do offshore, either wind or marine tidal wave. Colorado City become one of the first to run completely on renewables. Now, again, these are somewhat, I want to make sure you understand, and 6 other cities here are running on 100%. Aspen, Colorado, Burlington, Vermont, Georgia, Texas, Greensburg, Kansas, Rockport, Missouri, Kodiak Island, Alaska, out of this 2019 report on the Hill here in DC. But I also want to point out to you, cities can't necessarily produce all the energy within the city limits. So a lot of these cities are investing in wind farms or solar farms or geothermal plants slightly outside to bring the power in, but that's not the point. The point is that they're making the commitment to go 100% and deserve recognition for being leaders. So the good news out of Pew Charitable Trusts is even in this COVID situation, states are not walking away from their clean energy growth plans. What we're seeing in the European approach, that they are also pretty robust in what they can meet in terms of their energy needs. We can also see that in June, renewable energy surpassed coal for the first time in the US. Coal was over 50%. Now it's not even over 20%. This is astounding what's happened here. And most of that's been made up by renewables. This is true in other countries. Germany exceeds 50% renewable energy in delivering in certain part times of the year. Hydrogen and carbon capture have a play here, and so this is, I put this in here just to make sure that you're looking at hydrogen, renewably produced and used as storage for everything from fuels for heavy trucks to electric power generation, is absolutely a solid way to also be part of this conversion. This is the geothermal capacity in the United States. Now, lots in west, but look along that Appalachian region there, and you're going to see that tripling over the next 2 decades. This is where concentrated solar is, and you can look at Spain with over 2 gigawatts, and of course the United States approaching 2 gigawatts, and China 1.5 gigawatts, and of course actually Morocco, this is a little dated because this is last updated 2019, but in 2020 they're just shy over 1 gigawatt, and South Africa's approaching 1 gigawatt. So you're going to see huge growth. India is also coming on robustly, and Chile also has over 1 gigawatt. So the idea of having nuclear power plants worth of power starting to come on in 24-hour solar cost effectively is very exciting. I want to point out China gets slapped a lot, but China, as I showed you in the wind chart early, is one of the biggest users of wind in the world for itself, and it's one of the biggest users of solar for itself, and it's also one of the biggest benefiters of energy efficiency for itself. Microgrids, and I do a lot of microgrids, so I pulled this 2020 article report on the tracker. But what we're seeing is huge growth, about 31,000 or 31 gigawatts of planned and installed power capacity for microgrids. And microgrids are usually a blend of on-site renewable generation, sometimes also with some diesel, and batteries. Usually, there are many different approaches to them, and that they again can passively tie to the grid or exit from the grid and sustain power in times of outage. And we've shown that in Puerto Rico and other places that it's astounding what we can do now with these new sensors and controls and sectionalizers and reclosers that have been developed not only for the grid itself, but for microgrids. So I end this so we can have some questions. When I worked in the Senate, I worked with John Glenn, the senator from Ohio, who was our first astronaut. He voted for all the solar bills because he said when he looked out of the spaceship, he believed there was life on other planets, but really, but they don't look anything like us. And he looked at Earth and he said to me, this is our nest. And he said, this is when I became an environmentalist. And so I just want to remind you, this is our nest, and it's up to us to make it happen. So I want to remind you, I am happy to answer questions now that Carly will moderate, but I have my email, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have, give you any studies, and support your interest and quest in this 100% renewable energy. That will be the theme of our conference in June. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Scott. All right, well, hello everybody. Carly Cipolla here, Director of Operations with the American Solar Energy Society. So Scott, I want to go ahead and share some questions and comments from the audience. Question from Michael Lipkin is asking, what is a recloser on the electric grid?
We have technologies, they're called sectionalizers and reclosers, and these are essentially sensor-controlled switches that if they sense a waiver in electricity, for instance, the sectionalizer can separate itself out. So have part of the grid separate itself out from another part of the grid that maybe has lots of transformers blowing out, or a hurricane has blown it out, but it protects the rest of the grid from having a domino effect. That's what a sectionalizer. A recloser is, as that grid comes back up and meets a certain power quality frequency requirements for the grid, it can then automatically connect back up. And those are, we have similar, they're not called that in microgrids to do the same thing. And we just didn't have that stuff, 15 years ago. We have it now. Thank you.
All right, great. And a question from Chris Carrick. Scott, can you comment on the availability of rare earth elements needed for solar PV, wind, electric vehicles, both in terms of total recoverable reserves and economically recoverable resources?
Well, I do want to point out, first of all, that not all these technologies actually require rare earths. And so, yes, generally turbines do, or motors do, but we have a lot of development going on to replace rare earths with other things that have similar properties. So, and that's been going on, frankly, for the last 8 years, when China first threatened to limit some availability of its rare earth supplies. But we actually have a huge amount of rare earth supplies all over the place. And in fact, I just read an article in the Wall Street Journal of a hill in western Texas that's scrubland that has probably the largest deposits of rare earth in North America. So we actually have quite a bit of it. I think we need to develop, since that China threat, there a lot of the private sector investment firms around the world and the mineral interests have bought up reserves. But what we really need to do is look at other ways to get rare earths. The one I like the most is the new geothermal project announced in the Salton Sea in California. One of the aspects of bringing the hot water up out of the earth is to pull lithium and also other rare earths out of the water. And there's been some grants given, research grants by Department of Energy in this direction too. There is no place where, if we're pulling anything out of the ground, we shouldn't be sorting out rare earths, lithium, what we need for storage at the moment, and other things that are essential. The other part that's the big Achilles heel in ramping up renewables has been recycling. And right now, only a couple of battery companies actually 100% recycle their batteries, like East Penn out of Pennsylvania. We have a couple of national photovoltaic companies that recycle their solar panels in the manufacturing process. Our two largest ones here in the United States, for instance. WEA is working with the industry on wind turbine blades with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. We have a lot of stuff that needs to get back into the manufacturing process and not dumped or left on site, but actually part of rejuvenizing renewables and not creating another problem that might kick us in the butt later down the line. So I guess the short response to you is we actually have a huge amount of rare earths to meet this 100% challenge, but it shouldn't be totally reliant on mining. It should be based on a significant part on reuse as well. And we need to do that for all the materials used in efficiency and renewables, as well as anything else in our economy.
Yep, that's a really good point. Recycling first. And Elaine Hebert has a question for you as well. Scott, have you seen the Jeff Gibbs / Michael Moore movie, Planet of the Humans, while they use some old data and might have misrepresented some things? They brought up the point that there are environmental consequences in mining the raw materials to make PV modules, wind turbine components, etc. And it wasn't benign to put solar mirrors in the desert. Many old desert plants were destroyed in Ivanpah
Yep.
on the environmental consequences of renewable energy technologies.
I did see the movie and it was badly researched, but here's the deal they actually didn't address. And this is what we all have to come to terms with. We have a rapidly changing climate. And so we have basically two choices. You either keep the status quo and have it fossil oriented, or you try to get as fast as you can away from fossil. And obviously energy efficiency is the most benign, so obviously we want to do that. And then you have to use these renewables. And so yes, you're going to have to mine, and I'm sorry about that, but if it keeps temperatures down, the impact of that mining will be way less than frying a planet. So, I'd say you have to be an adult about this. And yes, there's no question that some of the earlier large concentrated solar projects didn't deal as I would have liked with some of the local flora and fauna, but a lot have. And by the way, California made them, and Arizona and New Mexico has them, they have video in their trucks, and they can be remotely looked at by the state environmental agencies and land agencies, so they don't run over the desert tortoise and a lot of these other things, and the plants and flora and fauna, and they're limited in speed. And there's all ways to put footers in for these mirrors or concentrators. So yeah, I mean, there is going to be some degradation, but can you do it the right way? Yes. And part of it is the sophistication of states and local governments and regulators to create those standard practices and then train about it. I spent a lot of time in my life training around these technologies because they're so new and it just takes time. But is it mean that this is inherently bad? That's nonsense. We need to get out of fossil fuels. We need the widest potential portfolios to use so you prevent the abuses and the not optimizing technology and land use, which we must do.
Right. And I've got one more question from you, from David Krause. Are there any studies available that analyze potentially detrimental effects of converting our available energy sources to electricity and eventually heat? For example, if all wind energy was converted to electric power, what would be the effect on weather and the climate?
Well, yes, there have been studies on looking at both large climate impacts, but mostly some microclimate impacts on wind use and solar use. And there are some microclimate impacts, but the cities and suburbs have created microclimate impacts too. The reflection from rooftops and roadways have definitely hurt our microclimate. So obviously, certain different kinds of developments are going to have some impacts. And yeah, it is. You do have some changes in the heat and reflection and everything else, but nothing I've seen, and happy to share reports for anybody who's interested, to me is really a deal breaker, because frankly, if it's not done that way, it's done by a conventional way, and those ramifications are worse. So again, back to the Michael Moore movie, it's, people living on a planet ruin the planet the more you have, no question about it. and they need energy and clean water, no question about it. And the issue is, are you going to take the least benign step or leave the status quo? And I don't believe there's a choice here. You must take the least benign step.
Oh, I have one more good one for you and something I'm also interested. What do you think the role is that nuclear should play in the 21st century in the energy system?
You notice I didn't cover it. I sort of left it out for a couple of different reasons. While we have now our large nuclear power plants, of which in the United States we're subsidizing a third of them, they're not economic. And and I also showed you a chart that the grid is going into a more self-healing grid approach, and nuclear doesn't fit in it very comfortably. You know, in fact, a natural gas plant or a biogas plant, if I don't need the load, I can just dial it down to what I need the output to be. You can't do that with a nuclear power plant. It's on and off. And of course, then we have the nuclear waste issue. And so I've sort of said we really don't need it. The industry has been looking at smaller nuclear power plants, and it possibly might make sense in certain locations if you can deal with some of the nuclear waste, particularly if you can entomb it with the plant. But you know, again, I have problems with nuclear waste, that the waste lives longer than most governments have ever lasted. So it's an issue. I don't want to get into the issue actually, other than saying renewables and energy efficiency can meet it all. And there may be certain aspects nuclear might be able to add some, but it's not going to be really a major player with terrorism and cybersecurity issues that also are confronting everything, and particularly hazardous with them. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, great. Scott, do you have any final comments?
No, just thank you all for willing to hear this out. This is again a sort of a test for the June meeting, but you know, we want to get more and more people talking about going 100%, which sounded nutsy when I started in the 70s, but it's not so nutsy now. And I hope you join me in nutsiness and pursue this. And thank you to ASES for stepping up on this issue.
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott. Thank you for doing this webinar for us this month. It was great. And thank you for being our conference chair this year. We're excited to have you in June. And for everyone that's on the webinar right now, I really hope you join myself and Scott and all of the other participants that we have in June, and sign up at ases.org/conference. And thank you so much for joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you next month on our June webinar. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Scott. We'll see you guys later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.